Hello, everyone. I'm Paul Plotkin, Senior Account Executive at G&G Technologies, and thank you for joining us today for another in our Product Spotlight webinar series focusing in on NewTek production switches. G&G hosts this series every second and fourth Wednesday of the month, featuring industry-leading manufacturers including JVC Pro, Blackmagic, Panasonic, Shure, Sennheiser, NewTek, and many others. Please note, due to the Thanksgiving Day holiday, our next webinar will be December 14th, so please look for future invites from G&G, and we certainly hope to see you here again soon. Wow, what a get we got this morning. Chris Burgos is one of the most sought-after speakers and panelists in our industry today, not because of the company he represents, but for his vast experience and expertise in all things live production. Chris started his journey streaming live events for colleges, sports events, and corporate work, but quickly rose through the ranks to do major esports events around the country. In an effort to elevate innovative work and stories, Chris goes the extra mile to search out those small-scale creators who are making a difference in our industry. With an eye towards the future, Chris is a voice for change and a champion of educating people on why the future of streaming ain't so scary. So without any further ado, I am so happy to present Chris Burgos. Chris, take it away.
Paul, that was literally one of the best introductions I've ever had. Welcome everybody to our talk today. A little bit before we get into it, we're gonna just cover like 3 topics today. We're gonna talk about NDI, or we're going to talk about the TriCasters. So we're going to talk about the Mini, and then we're going to talk about the TC2. So we're going to keep this relatively easy and get a lot of pictures going on. I'm going to save some time for some interactivity. So if you guys have questions, drop them in the chat. And at the very end, I'm not actually in my traditional home in New Jersey. I'm out on the West Coast. As Paul said, I'm going to be on I'm in a lot of panels. I'm going to be talking about esports over here in LA, but I'm actually going to do a little bit of a remote demonstration to a TriCaster. So we'll actually see what this all looks like in actuality over a hotel Wi-Fi. What could possibly go wrong? Before we get there, let's go to our presentation. And Paul, this is all going smoothly, right? We got screen share coming?
We are good.
Okay, so our presentation today is here. I am Chris Burgos. I'm a senior sales engineer for NewTek. We are part of Viz Group. I think a lot of people don't know that these days, but more stories better told is what we talk about when we're at Viz. But today we're really going to focus on what we do at NewTek and what NDI does. But a little bit about myself. Paul gave me that amazing introduction. I have been using a TriCaster since I basically was in college. I joined NewTek in 2015. I work on all kinds of different aspects. I'm with our distributors. I'm on marketing outreach. I'm doing esports events. And my background really comes from being a live production guy. I worked with USTA. I've done AAA baseball. I've done professional wrestling, the Surf Bowl Magazine Awards. And it was sort of one of my big highlights was working with a Major League Gaming, which is a video game streaming company, and I was like on their first stream that cracked 200,000 concurrent viewers. So I've done a lot of different work, and here's a smattering of things I like to get into. I love hiking. I like getting boxing in, and I'm a little bit of a nerd too. Who would have thought? But today here we're really talking about NewTek, and our goal is we want to give storytellers a voice through video. And in doing so, we are going with innovation first. We are kind of used all over the world, from large production environments, such as what we're seeing here, sports facilities, major events, gaming, streaming. We're also in small shows. We're in houses of worship. We're in high schools. We're in colleges. We're in small production teams. NewTek really scans the gamut, and most of that is because we believe that the future of video is in computers, it's in software, and it's in networks. Let's visualize how this looks. And I think this breaks down a lot of what we're used to seeing. There are 3 traditional silos when we think of our industry, right? We have our broadcast technologies, we have our communications technologies, like what we're using today, we're using Zoom. And then we have just like our AV tech, stuff that's just designed to move video and audio around their facilities. And today, all of these things are computer-based. All of these things have software behind them. And largely all of these things are on the network. And that's sort of the beauty of what our first conversation is going to be is that NDI is all of these things. NDI stands for the Network Device Interface. It's our video, audio, metadata, and over IP protocol. So our first conversation is that NDI. I hear a little feedback on the mic. We have it's a royalty-free and open available SDK. So anyone developing an NDI, you have to pay nothing to NewTek. You just sign up for SDK. And we kind of designed we designed NDI from the ground up to be around gigabit network connections. So that means that it can work in any kind of network environment. And there was a release of NDI 5.5 that we'll talk about briefly. So what are we doing in NDI? What are we caring about, right? So it's a software-defined AV over IP protocol. That means that in essence, we want to get your audio and video over your network, reducing the need for like traditional cables, less long SDI runs, less fiber, less what we're doing in HDMI, more of just what we can get available in IP Ethernet cables. It's lightweight and low latency, so we can get up to 4K 60 feeds into some of our systems, and that can all carry over a single cable. And a lot of the ease of use that we do for NDI is making it just human. When we do our demonstration later, I'll showcase what that means, but PTZ cameras and NDI are named PTZ cameras. I'm never having to memorize an IP address, and this allows me to work within it very easily. It's also interoperable between other standards, and so we work with all kinds of IP standards, whether it be the SMPTE standards or the contemporary streaming platforms, web stream files, SRT. All of that stuff can be interoperated within NDI, and we future-proof it. We do a lot of dev work at Viz Group in making sure that NDI is cutting edge. With over 10 years of development, we sort of released NDI into the world at IBC in 2015. So it's been around the block. It's been here, and it's kind of exceeded expectations in the last 6 years. A lot of organizations have got into adopting NDI workflows. At some point, we just stopped tracking what the SDK was doing and just said, hey, look, there's so many people developing on it. It's in a crazy number. I know this over 14,000 is a quite dated number, but we have a lot of notable industry leaders who are working with us. Organizations like Panasonic, Sony, Avid, all work with IP protocol. Here's a list of a bunch of vendors that you might work with today. Things like the Microsoft Teams supports NDI. There are a couple of NDI particular manufacturers. Birdog's one that stands out. These are all kinds and all different forms of production, right? We have camera manufacturers, switcher manufacturers. We have people doing AR and VR walls. A lot of organizations work with our IP protocol today. In its development, there are two versions of NDI. There are NDI and NDI-HX, and we're going to get into the differences. Importantly to note that we do NDI both in software and in hardware. So we talk about our NDI TriCasters, which we have showcased here. We also have things that embed for things like FPGAs, right? So the converters and such, these hardware products that are going to get us into and out of our environment. And then the HX protocol, which we have quite a few things to talk about, but in short, it's what we use for a lot of our sort of plug-and-play devices, something like the PTZ camera, or we have HX development for the iPhone and Android devices. This basically gets down to the encoding difference, and so we're a little deep in the weeds here, but basically we are doing DCT encoding in our high bandwidth version of NDI, and on the flip side, we're using H.264 or HVAC, HEVC when we're doing our HX encoding. So there's a difference in bandwidth, and that sort of is important in different environments. We think of traditional NDI. If you're a broadcast house, you're going to do everything NDI, normal. If you're a school or a church and you're using some legacy network equipment, then NDI-HX is going to make a lot more sense for you. I include this slide for anyone who is a numbers guy like myself. We do have hard numbers on what these different targets are going to look like. This is just the amount of network traffic, because we're talking about IP. And I realize we're talking very esoteric right now. When we get to the TriCasters, we're going to make this very hard and tied into what a production pipeline looks like. But this is all important because I think it starts to answer and talk about a lot of the questions people think about. NDI is resolution independent. We can do SD, HD, 4K. We can work with mobile. We can work with Square. So however we want to get our sources into or out of NDI, we can work with those. It's generationally lossless, so we can go through 1,000 different encodes and everything will look exactly the same. I think that's important as we think about sort of our traditional broadcasters and the number of pieces of equipment you might introduce that might step on that signal. Well, hey, in NDI, that's going to keep working just fine. We have 3 different color spaces we support, 8-bit, 16-bit, and 10-bit. We go through all kinds of frame rates, all the way from 25 to 120. This is important in these new and emerging markets, especially with the small broadcasters, the people who are streaming video games from home. This is where these frame rates start to become more and more popular. We also include audio when we do NDI, which allows us to really sort of capture the needs. And it gets into some interesting workflows when we talk about a PTZ camera. So if a PTZ camera has introduced audio, right, we can capture that audio along with that video signal in NDI. When we're sharing sources between our different devices, we know all the content we need is going to come along with us. And as we build our switching platform, the TriCaster, we allow for the sort of tools to work in these IP environments. NDI can also be recorded straight to disk. So we have a file, a feed living on a network. We can go through a TriCaster and record that to a disk locally on the machine or just anywhere in our network. So the ability to record our IP feeds is there as well. And then finally, I think, this will be my sort of first stopping point here. Everything within NDI is available for free on ndi.tv. We have a smattering of tools that allow you to do all kinds of things like capturing a source, setting a source around, viewing things for engineering purposes. We have the ability to take an IP source and bring it into a webcam environment like we might do for this call. And just some general purpose tools like a test patterns if you're an old school engineer, as well as an access manager, which allows it to sort of route NDI. So this is a small snippet of what is available on the SDK, but if you're interested in getting involved in NDI, you can download that for free at www.ndi.tv, and you can find the toolkit. We also have, this is the Windows offering. We also have a Mac offering as well. We're going to take a small step away now that we've talked about NDI, and we're going to talk about some of the things that NewTek makes. And I want to get into the small end of the pool. So if you have any questions, please drop them in chat. And we're going to sort of make this esoteric concept a lot more concrete, because we're going to talk about our mini family line. We sort of have 4 different lines we carry at NewTek today on our switchers. These are our live production switchers. And we're going to start at the small end to give you an understanding of what that's capable of. And then we're going to expand upon that when we talk about some of the higher end products. But we're going to focus in on the mini right now. And here's the mini in a snapshot. There are 2 variants of the mini. There's the mini 4K and the mini X, but they do basically these exact things the same. We have 8 sources, which can be a mix of HDMI, IP. If you have converters, SDI. We have 2 media play buffers. We have animation buffers, the ability to do video switching, mixing, compositions. We have audio mixing as well and processing. And then we have a bunch of outputs that we do. So we consider our outputs for ISO records separate from what we do from streaming. So when you're looking at something like the TriCaster Mini, you actually get a lot of functionality. We're still working with the Skype TX protocol, which does support Teams. So if you're looking at a great entry-level solution, I really say the TriCaster Mini is a very full-fledged product. It gives you a very high-end experience for its form factor. It's about the size of like a thick textbook, so it's very portable, and it is fully IP compliant, just like some of the bigger boys. Now, granted, we're only worrying about 8 sources compared to something like the TriCaster 2, which is going to do 32 4Ks, but these boxes are still very efficient. And then since we do have these 2 competing products in the same space, we have the Mini X and the Mini 4K. There's just a couple of slight differences, and I sort of outlined them here. Our Mini X, and they look very similar, can only do up to 4K 30. The Mini X does have direct connections for HDMIs in the box versus the Mini 4K, which has a built-in router. So one is a little bit more IP-centric and one is a little bit more HDMI-centric. If you are looking for something that's sort of a step between your HDMI environment and looking at IP, I highly recommend looking at the Mini X. It's brand new. And one last point is that we released a feature called Live Link, which allows you to basically inject a web page data feed into your production. That comes shipping with the Mini X. So if you have a Mini 4K and you want to get Live Link, you need to update to the latest software build. That'll get you those feature sets. That's just another small difference between them. But from a production perspective, from an outputs perspective and streaming perspective, there's a lot that goes into what the Mini X is. We're going to sort of go to the other side of the spectrum. We're looking at the TriCaster 2. So this is our sort of broadcast behemoth. It's at the very top end of the food chain. We've got 32 sources. We've got all kinds of configurations. It can actually do multiple outputs of both 4K and 1080 simultaneously. So this is looking at the very top of what we're doing. We can do multiple rooms from the system. We have an entire matrix that we can control within the TriCaster 2, as well as having 8 mix effects for virtual sets and pictures and different kinds of configurations. I'll actually be showcasing a TC2 towards the end of our conversation, but we're sort of on the other side of this, right? These are for our tried and true broadcasters, large-scale infrastructure setups, or if you're an organization that's got multiple sites, maybe you're looking at what the TC2 is capable of for you. Here's a look at the back side of the box, and it's very traditional in this respect. We have SDI inputs on it. We have audio inputs on it. We've got redundant power setup. We're looking at someone who's looking for that sort of high-level professional approach. We're working with 4 monitors for things like the interface and multi-viewer. We also support 10 gig on these boxes because you're going to have a lot of IP. And we're giving you that sort of different approach, right? This is not something that is a thick textbook portable, right? This is a 3-rack unit. And really designed for those sort of high levels of production. But it is also remote accessible, and we do a lot of stuff in IP. And so we just like spelled out every IP source that we can possibly think of when we think of our TriCaster. But you know, a source can be an SDI source connected directly to it. It can be something coming in over SRT, over NDI. We can support HDMI connectivity, all kinds of streaming platforms. Also, we're working with lots of these call-in applications, these virtual meeting rooms. So all of these things can be brought into your TriCaster fairly easily. Looks like we have our first chat. Okay, Paul's reminding us. And so our TC2 can now mix these different kinds of sources, whether it be a call-in source from a Teams call or a Zoom call like we're in. I can intermix that with other IP sources. I can intermix that with SDI sources. I can intermix that with HDMI sources. The TriCaster 2 is sort of that pinnacle of live production. How can I mix and utilize all these different kinds of sources simultaneously? And we really kind of tout it as the most complete production system in the world because it is this sort of next level. It's entirely IP driven. The control surface shown here is also IP connected. These monitors can be entirely IP driven as well. It literally is that sort of next iteration on where your productions are going. So let's talk a little bit about this sort of crown jewel of what makes TC2 really unique, and it's this feature called Live Call Connect. We have been on Teams calls and Zoom calls a million times over, and it's pretty much the same kind of content. And what we really looked at is how can we make this more engaging? And so we want to work with all kinds of different programs and give you a lot of callers to work with. And this is sort of the idea behind Live Call Connect. We can take these sort of Brady Bunch grid that we're all used to with our 9 callers. We can separate these out into individual inputs, and we can actually bring them into our production with this application, Live Call Connect. I'll give a brief demonstration of this product at the end here, but it really allows us to do really slick things. So once we have an input in the TriCaster, we can then modify that input, right? We could key somebody in a virtual set. We can change the colors of the proc amp. We can start to crop things out. Because we are working with what was a 9-group caller, but now we're individualizing each as an input, we can sort of change the way our production goes through. And this even supports 4K and UHD. So what we get is something where with our mix effects, we go from having, you know, 4 callers and just sort of the aether of, you know, we have the 4 box, and then we're sort of able to manipulate them and utilize them in our production setup. We do, as well as we're talking about what's capable in TriCaster. We're also very popular in the green screen and virtual set setup. We can allow for the creation of some really cool effects. The lights reflecting through in this virtual set are sort of going to be presented in shadows. So the sort of realism that you're looking for if you're working in those virtual environments is possible in the TC2. It ships with some advanced virtual set features. And just a final synopsis, similar to what we looked at with the Mini, what's capable in your TriCaster, right? We have our inputs, outputs, tons of media playback capacity. It's got a RAID array hard drive on it, so it can store a lot of data in it. So if we want to roll pre-rolls or commercials, or just having content stored locally on the system, it's got a larger flexibility of IP, as well as controlling IP outputs. So it can do a lot from a production perspective at a very high level. Now, I throw this slide in just because we very recently released a system called the TriCaster 1 Pro, and it actually shares a lot of its DNA with the TriCaster 2. The big differences are just in the number of inputs and outputs. So it's looking at about, for simplicity's sake, you get about half So instead of having 32, we have 16. We have 4 outputs, but these are 1080 outputs, so we can do a single quad link 4K. Instead of getting 9 callers, we have 4 callers, and we have 4 MVs. So, it's a lot of the same features we just talked about with video switching capacity, ME capacity, streaming capacity, a lot built into that box, but sort of at just a smaller level. And I think for a lot of organizations looking at NewTek for your first time, I think the TC1 Pro is at the right price point and at the right feature set that it probably makes sense for your production setup. If you were stagnant during the pandemic and really struggling to do these Zoom and Teams meetings and want to sort of elevate your game, I think looking at a TC1 Pro is an amazing option. Finally, and I cut some of these slides down because I didn't know how long we'd be going. I don't want to bore people, but we did release NDI, and we're in the 5th generation of NDI. It is something that we do a lot of development work on. Anyone who has questions about NDI 5 specific things, I have extra slideshow there if we want to go through it. But one of the big pieces we've done in NDI 5, and what I'm about to showcase, is the ability to do NDI over the wide area network. Everything we've talked about in this presentation thus far has been kind of dedicated to like local network stuff. What can I do in my business? What can I do in the buildings I'm in? What can I do in my studio? And how can I IP those things together? And what I'm going to showcase here is the ability to go over the wide area network. So I'm going to pause our little presentation here, take a beat, and let's see if I can get this screen up. Share. Okay, so this is actually my TriCaster back in New Jersey. I actually don't have one in my apartment. I keep it in a studio space. Some people I know, because I always like to really hammer home what is possible in IP. So lots of things we can do. First and foremost, I see everything associated with my TriCaster. We talked about NDI being very human focused, right? So I can see, hey, here's my TriCaster, right? It's labeled as a TC2E. It's actually labeled with my name and my location for it. And I can see different things. I can see the mix outputs. I can see the DDR channels. I can see different inputs going into it, buffer channels, all the different outputs. I have my TriCaster sort of configured as if it was doing a sports environment, because that's a big part of my background. So I labeled 2 of my video playback channels as replay channels. I can see those, the teleprompter. I can see the multi-viewers. All of this is happening in IP. On these monitors here, and we talked about this feature called Live Call Connect, I've got a Zoom call. And what I want to do is sort of just showcase how this Live Call Connect feature works, right? So this is what everyone's doing around the clock. Like, we're in one of these right now, right? We're on a Zoom call, and what we effectively want to do is like make our production life easier. And at NewTek, we really made this as simple as possible. We have this little widget at the top. So this is traditional Zoom installed, nothing special. We don't have a custom link. This isn't Zoom Rooms or some additional program. You install the traditional application, whether that's Zoom, Teams, Slack, Discord, what have you, FaceTime, Facebook Messenger, WhatsApp. You install those on the TriCaster itself now, and that's for the TC2 and the TC1 Pro. And with this little button press I've done at the top here, oh, there we go. This little widget at the top, I've now grabbed this application, right? So that's button press 1. So I know I'm going to be working with the Zoom application. The only other thing I need to do is assign my callers to inputs. And I have done all of the production work I need to make sure that I can do a virtual meeting room event with my TriCaster. Just those 2 button presses. So what does that mean in actuality? Come over back, and I'm just switching between 2 different monitors. I don't have a multi-monitor setup. I'm just working off my laptop, but this is what you can do off of the TriCaster. And so now you'll notice I have these inputs, which were blank before. They're filled with the callers. They're filled with these callers as individuals. And we'll notice there's nothing being pushed over from the Zoom room. The name tag isn't being presented. These are just clean video feeds that we have come out of that Zoom environment. So step 1 done. Step 2, we've already pre-mixed minus the audio. So if you're used to having to run 6 laptops to do your Zoom call and having to do this intense audio matrix and routing, and maybe you have a really slick audio mixer, you don't have to worry about that when you're working with the TriCaster. Each of the audio feeds is going to be, it's muxed, right? So Zoom is giving us one audio feed, or Teams is giving us one audio feed, and that's coming into our TriCaster. And we're giving them back everything but themselves. On something like the TC2, we actually have the ability to show what's going back to the Teams caller. So any of our mix outputs could actually be going there. Any of our audio outputs could be going there. This is really important when we're actually getting into the production part of our show, because, well, maybe I want to showcase the full production on the meeting. Maybe I want them to see every video that we play. I want them to hit every time cue, etc. I can do that. Or maybe I want to show something separate. Maybe I want to just show them the teleprompter. Maybe I just want to show them the host the entire time. Different guests require different kinds of environments, and so the TriCaster doesn't limit you. We're giving you that feed in there, we're making it easy to present, and then we're giving you the tools to say, well, what do you want to do with those feeds? And I think all of those come in handy when, you know, we're doing something with, like, the owner of our company. Hey, you know, here's a script to read. You know, we're going to operate the teleprompter for them while they're going through. So instead of seeing what would be our camera feed, like I see Paul right now, I would actually just be showing them this, you know, teleprompter. You have prompter built into that. So that's an example of a feed you could present. We could just have it be a host or a guest. We could have it just be a timer, so they know how much time they have left on their show. We sort of have a clock and an end here when we're doing our events. So a very high level of production flexibility is available with the TC2. Extensive audio mixing capabilities. One of the ones I always like to point out is we have a very intense audio router, so now we can go through and send different feeds in different environments. We also do a lot of audio processing. So we have our traditional compressor limiter, our noise gate, but the new neural voice isolation tool, I think, is amazing for anyone who's been working with, you know, talking heads or just voices in an environment when you have some people in studio. Neural voice isolation, essentially, this little tick box here, it's an AI-driven algorithm that sort of normalizes their audio. So air conditioners, not going to be present. Something loud in the studio environment, or today we're working with a lot of people from home. So, you know, the dog's barking in the background. The neural voice isolation will sort of eliminate all that background noise. It's been really amazing as someone who comes from production, who's used to working like a compressor limiter and engaging a noise gate. Like, those tools have been around for a while and they're useful, but the difference with neural voice isolation is I don't have to constantly man my audio. I can sort of set and forget and not worry that my production is going to suffer. It's a really slick tool. It's available on the TC2 and the One Pro, which is sort of why we highlight those differently. So let's actually just like utilize these sources now that we've talked about them. I'm going to return my composition to my 4 boxes, and we'll sort of get our last guest in. So now we're, and here I am just remote operating a TriCaster from my laptop, and we'll get into the specifics of that at the end. But I have 4 callers, and I can go in and do a production that is at a level equivalent to something greater than what the Zoom call is, right? I can isolate an individual. I can go through and make a 2 box. I can isolate the other caller. I can introduce more callers into our setup. We can do all kinds of funny interactions, but effectively, I'm not limited to just what the Zoom looks like. I'm not limited to just what the Teams call is doing, or whatever, what have you. I'm now sort of the master of what this production looks like. And this is the program that's going out to our audience, right? This would be what you guys would be watching at home. But what's happening internal to the call is a separate feed. So I really gain the ability to present both to the people in the call how I want to, right? Relevant information, maybe a video that plays or something like that, while I'm presenting to the people at home via stream something that's much more dense and rich and really sort of suits our high-end goals for our broadcast. I think when you pull all these pieces together, you can do some interesting things. I sort of mimicked up what a lot of people are doing today, where they'll have like a presenter plus mode. So instead of this being, you know, this would be something like this, where our person's talking about a slideshow that they're showing, kind of like what I'm doing for us on this call right here. Well, with the TriCaster behind the scenes, you could sort of showcase the slideshow and have the person talking and be in total control over all those pieces. And what I'm doing with this composition window, again, is super easy. I don't need a control surface here on my side to be able to operate at this level. So
yeah, the amazing thing about this is I'm hosting in Narragansett, Rhode Island. You're sitting in LA. Your
yep.
switcher is in Jersey.
And I don't think we're seeing any sort of noticeable
There is
latency.
no lag here at all.
So before
No,
anyone
it's
thinks that
awesome.
there's some kind of smoke and mirrors behind the scenes, we have a protocol called NDI Bridge that supports this. This is, if you've heard me speak at something, you've heard me say the word bridge. It's the final piece of the puzzle. Bridge is open on my laptop here. It's a little piece of software, and I would show it to you, but there's nothing going on besides it having the IP address and the encryption key. But effectively, Bridge allows me to say, hey, I'm going to turn my local NDI facility into a wide area network NDI facility so that other people can interact with me. As long as both members, the host and join, have the same encryption key, I can do what I'm doing here. And because I'm going to be doing an event tomorrow and we're doing our event today, I actually have my encryption set all the way down to 1 meg. So we were talking about NDI and the amount of bandwidth it takes. I'm doing all of this over a total of a megabit of data transfer. So that means I can work in my hotel Wi-Fi environment. I can work on my, hopefully what's going to be happening tomorrow at my SVG event. I have brought a little hotspot with me, but I'm not like constrained to trying to do these massive amounts of IP workflows. I can do this all with, like I said, the hotel Wi-Fi. This was a little bit of a gamble I took because I didn't have a lot of time to test the hotel Wi-Fi. I got in pretty late, but I'm so confident because I use Bridge all the time that I just know what I'm working with. And so I wonder if this will work. Let's see if I can just pull the application up. It's very simple. Yeah, it's ultra simple. So
wow.
If you're the host, by the way, you can actually copy the data. So if you're working with like a known entity that you want to send all the pieces across, you can do that. And right now it's showcasing the return bandwidth. I'm not, oftentimes when I'm on these calls, I have a green screen. So what I'll do is I'll take my caller and my microphone, bring it into the TriCaster, key myself up, tweak my video a little bit so my colors are better, and change my audio setups, and then bring that back to the call I'm in. For today's purposes, because I have a green screen behind me, we're just going directly from the Zoom. But this little application is free. It's easy to set up, and you could do the entirety of your production from anywhere in the world. And because it has an encryption key, and you can see my encryption key is fairly long. This is actually sort of something that we heavily insist upon. This is a security measure, right? Whenever we go to the wide area network, we don't want you opening up a port and allowing somebody to get in. If you do not have that encryption key, you cannot talk with any devices on the far end. So this is sort of how we're looking at the future of security and IP transfer. Like, we're working with this stuff. And on the far end, let's see if I can just bring this back over, just to hammer this point home. It looks very, very human when we're interacting with it. When I go to a source, I see that there's a bridge set up. And on the bridge, I can see my home computer. I have a second connection in my apartment that's doing some slick stuff. And I can see the TriCaster locally. Like, these are just sources. My home computer's got a webcam associated with it. I've got a NVIDIA graphics card connected to 2 monitors on my computer. None of this is like some obtuse data string, or I don't have to reference everything. Everything is labeled as I'd like it to be, including the bridge itself. So in operation, when you're doing the engineering workflow, or when someone's just using NDI, it's very understandable.
And that NDI bridge is located on the NDI.com site, correct?
Yep. It's part of the toolkit that you guys can get.
It's part of the toolkit. Gotcha.
Yeah, sure. Okay, so I want to give some time for Q&A. I know we've been going for a little bit, and then
amazing. We've got good attendance here, and not a single question. But I was wondering if you can briefly talk about the feature set in LiveLink.
Yeah, so LiveLink is LiveLink's fairly new for us. The short story of what we're doing in LiveLink is today there's lots of just like web page based graphic setups. So HTML5 is sort of growing tremendously. We've seen this in the sort of streaming space with Twitch users effectively allowing them to generate quick graphics that sort of overtake their screen. Most of this is done totally automated, so they're not like interacting and having like drive a graphics machine. And so as we see this sort of trend growing, we recognize that especially at their entry level, where people are using home software to stream out, they're going to be exposed to HTML5 graphics. So that needs to now be a feature set on our TriCasters. So Live Link is just the ability to bring a web page in and have that web page bring content. Because it's NDI, that means that it has the color space to also be keyed. So we could send, you know, the extra keyable channel and then overlay that graphic onto what we do. And at NewTek, we recently acquired an organization called FlowX. And so FlowX allows us as an offering that we have that can inject HTML5 graphics over your production. So we have one. There are a ton of them available. And now the fact that the TriCaster supports the integration of HTML5 graphics, I would expect a lot more of them to adopt NDI-based workflows because now there's a way for them to interact with us. It is a subset of what we were doing with Live Call Connect. So the ability to sort of bring in these applications directly in on the system. We've now expanded that to the Mini X, the Mini 4K, TC1 and TC2. Those guys, sort of the bigger dogs, they always get all the feature sets, but I always like to point out, hey, if you don't necessarily need these call-in applications, but you do want some cool graphics, you can do that with the Mini X as well.
And just so people know, we are very encouraging people just to go NDI as integrators. It makes the install process so much, infinitely easier. In terms of cable runs, obviously, you're just going over CAT and that's it. And just the latency issues that were somewhat troublesome in the past, they don't exist anymore. They really don't.
Since we have a little time, Paul, I want to hit a couple of final points. Some cool NDI stuff that's happened in the last year that I think could be cool for everybody to sort of expand their minds. We'll go back into this little presentation as we talk about audio. I think audio is one of these things that in the IP space, like if we're just being very earnest right now, I think a lot of people are into Dante or AA67 based IP workflows. And there's just, I think a lot of those teams are stuck right now as they're trying to expand. Well, NDI's got this thing called Audio Direct, which allows us to work in VST based plugins. So if you're a real high level audio op who wants to go into some kind of, digital workstation for your audio, we now can take those feeds out of our NDI pipeline, and that can be coming off a PTZ camera or off the TriCaster itself, bring it into one of these very intense, like high level audio platforms, and then bring it back out into our system. It's really slick, and it just allows us to do the simplicity of, hey, we have our IP network, you have your digital audio workstation with all the plugins you like. Let's go through, sweeten that audio to be at a crisp level, make it concert level, make it that high level stream broadcast centric. And, you kind of do this all without leaving the IP space, because the workstation is on a piece of software, it's on a computer, and you're doing this all in NDI. So your latency, again, is non-existent.
Yeah.
We have some new remote features, I think, that are really cool, different from what we showcased. Remote is the ability to just send somebody a web link, so via web browser and bring them in. Very, very simple application. It's still growing. We sort of have the beta tag on it because I think remote is gaining more and more traction in smaller areas. But I'd always like to highlight, hey, look, if you don't want to work with Zoom or Teams or something like that, we have NDI Remote. This is can go on a web browser, so we can send it to a mobile device. So a lot of flexibility. It's going to hit the sort of NDI TV cloud before it gets brought back down to your TriCasters. Really, really easy to use. I think for opening low-level productions, I think it's a slick little tool that gets incorporated, again, totally for free. And we can do this in 2 instances. We can have an NDI-enabled workflow where someone's got some kind of NDI-enabled device. I know, Paul, you're using one in today's environment. I think PTZ Optics supplied you one. So we can do something like that. Or we can do some really cool things with configuration of remote sources. So the TriCaster side of this world has a little bit more that it can do with the remote environments. And then we talked about Bridge, I showcased it, but here's some brass tacks of what it looks like from an application perspective. There is host and join. All of this is available now. The ability to sort of take NDI sources from anywhere and push them out anywhere as well. We also allow you to flip NDI HX into full bandwidth NDI with Bridge. So if you are a high-level broadcaster and you want to bring in some of these sources, or we're thinking, well, what about that compression? What is that going to look like? I want to get that out and still have these sort of high-quality production environments. With NDI Bridge, we can do the flipping of those conversations. So I always think, hey, it's important to point out that beyond what we do in the WAN, NDI is very flexible. And then this is the bridge mode that we went through before, where I showcased, hey, I can go to and from my different locations.
That was awesome.
Okay.
Anybody have questions?
Thanks, Rich.
I do not see a single one in the chat or the Q&A. I think we may be good unless you want to cover some more stuff.
I'll just say for your needs today, I think NDI does a lot. It's both what we do as an organization at NewTek and Viz Group, and also in a lot of third-party partners. So what we sort of always want to make the bet on is that you're doing an NDI-enabled workflow in some capacity today. So maybe it's a TriCaster and some PTZ cameras. Maybe they're ours. We have brand new PTZ3s that are out there that are in both 1080 and UHD. Those guys are slick. They have a little audio jack, a little mini XLR right on the back of it. So if you need to route your audio into IP, just plug it back in the camera. You'll be fine. But it's more than us, right? There are tons of third-party developers, companies like BirdDog, companies like all the PTZ manufacturers who support what we do in NDI. And so I think at the end of the day, if you are looking to adopt, now's a great time. On the NewTek side, it's sort of this mature platform that we have seen success with for a very long time. And so we always make the bet that NDI is the way to go. And we continue to develop NDI, new product ranges ourselves. The Mini X and the TC1 Pro are both products that came out this year. So, none of this is stagnant. None of this is sort of resting on our laurels. We continue to innovate.
Chris, you can see the chat, can't you?
Yes. Yes.
Okay, so we do have a couple of questions there.
Yes. So let's hit Robert Watson's and then we'll hit Bob's. So Robert asked if we can incorporate Dante audio. Yes. The only thing you need to do is install the virtual sound card. So we'll support Dante audio, AES67, Windows Media, as well as just the traditional XLR and quarter-inch jacks on the TriCaster. So you can work with a very extensive Dante workflow on all of the devices. You need the virtual sound card. And funnily enough, because NDI's got audio as well, you can interoperate between Dante and NDI as you'd like to. That can do some really slick things when we talk about that bridge application, because we could be working with two Dante environments and two different remote facilities, and then go over the wide area network via NDI and then come back out into Dante. And Bob's asking about what router do you like to use? So while we don't have like a particular router manufacturer that we sort of say, oh, these are the guys who are ready. I know Netgear did release a series of routers that is NDI enabled with some profiles designed for it. So if a lot of people looking for a new purchase want to look somewhere, the Netgear routers out there. There are also some other smart third-party partners that we like to work with. Luxel, if you are looking for PoE-enabled environments with PTZ cameras or the Spark converters, where these devices can just have a single cable going to them. So we get video into them or video out of them and just run a single network cable for the power and the connectivity. The Luxel switches are amazing for that. They have great power banks. They're good IP switches. And then as we sort of scale up and think about the 4K, I think we always got to remember that the TriCaster can do 10 gig, but most of the devices are centered around 1 gig. So if you're looking for a switcher, just it only needs to have 1 or 2 10 gig ports just going into the TriCaster. Everything else is going to operate on a traditional 1 gig connection.
Yeah, those Netgear routers that Chris is talking about, that's the M4250 series, if anybody wants to look those up on the Netgear site. In terms of video routers, which ones, if any, does NewTek recommend?
Right. So in an IP scenario, that's going to do the video routing for us, right? By traditional. But if we're working with a traditional baseband video router, I know we have control for a lot of these things if they have IP support, so we can actually control and route what the router is pushing across. I think in function, when this actually hits the field, I think there's like, it's 50-50. I think some engineers want to keep their control so they can hit the router pointer and know everything's going to go through. And some guys just like things happening automated. The beauty of it is if you go the automation pathway, if the TriCaster needs to be fairly flexible in controlling the sources it's working with over SDI at a given moment, you can sort of achieve that at like an automation level with like, hey, I'm going to push this button and we're going to go from, you know, our morning show to our lunch show, right? And that'll like reconfigure all the inputs and have everything happen if you push for a button. Engineers who go that way, I think, save a lot of hair. I think when you know it's a backbone button, you can just press it and goes through. But certainly there's guys still doing traditional stuff. I know the Black Magics of the world, for instance, we can control their routers and other guys like that. I don't have the full list, but shame on me. I'm always very IP focused.
Let's see, do we have anything else? I think that's it. Chris, I cannot thank you enough for this. What an awesome presentation. Thank you, everybody, all our attendees for joining us. This will be posted on G&G's YouTube channel for future views. And again, I'd like to thank everyone and have a great rest of the day. Chris, good luck tomorrow. And
I got one last point, and
sure.
I would love everyone to do. We are actually, NewTek has the first ever, I think their production awards we're hosting. Obviously, we support a lot of systems out there. A little fact I didn't throw out is that there's TriCaster 2s came out in the pandemic, and there's been over 2,500 of those have landed at different customers. So there's a lot of these systems out there. But the production awards are going to happen next week. There will be a link on the NewTek webpage, and you can watch people who are doing productions with TriCasters. If you are interested in looking at that for next year, first, reach out to the guys at G&G, right? Talk with these guys. Second, once you have your system in, get ready, because we're going to be opening up the entries for next year's setup, and you can watch people from all over the globe who are doing productions with TriCaster. So look forward to that next week to be on our webpage.
That's awesome. That's awesome. All right, everyone. Well, thank you very much for the time today. Have a great rest of the Wednesday, and we hope to see you again soon. Take care, all.